And we are live for episode 11 of Start, Scale, Grow, a podcast for tech businesses that are starting, scaling, or growing. I've been looking forward to this one. I was just saying to Jason prior to the call, about 4 months in the making, this one. So it should be our best ever episode because we've had so long to prepare.
I've been practicing the whole time. Yeah.
But Jason, thank you so much for joining. Lovely to meet you. For some of those heathens who may not know you or know what you do you want to give us a quick couple of minutes intro?
Yeah. So I'm co-founder. Well, the main thing I do is as co-founder of a tech company. So we're called Cake, and Cake is an equity management solution for tech companies. So it covers all the most valuable feature is around employee equity, which is what we're going to talk about today. But it also includes really a whole wide range of things to do with startup equity, from raising capital to employee equity to managing the overall cap table or share registry, investor relations. So really cool fintech. We're the market leader in Australia now for tech companies in our niche, and we're expanding globally. We have 150,000 equity holders on there in 80 countries now, which is kind of wild. Been going for about 5 years, and as well as that, I'm also an investor. I have an early stage investment fund called Palm Beach Ventures currently, which we're rolling into something bigger and better for 2024. And and I work with startups and scale ups all day, every day. So I work with all the big accelerators, so that's a bit about me.
Perfect. Thank you, my friend. Equity seems to be something that we see get thrown around a fair bit. Seems to be, sort of, in my experience, sort of a really big divide of people who get it and understand it, and others that don't. They probably have some kind of preconception of what it is. But let's start probably the most sensible place. What actually is equity?
Yeah. So from my perspective, equity is the term for the ownership of a company. So I guess it can be used in the diversity and equity inclusion, and that's great and that's important as well. But what we're talking about today is the ownership of companies. So a partnership wouldn't have equity. It's different. If you're a sole trader, there wouldn't be equity. It's different. So in Australia, you're normally talking about, PTY, Ltd company, or perhaps even a unlisted public company, or, even companies on the stock market. Their ownership's called equity.
Right.
And pretty much every country around the world will do the same thing. It's the same globally. And breaking it down, so the main term people would hear when they're talking about equity would be shares. So that's the main thing. You have shares on the stock market. You might have shares in a company. So if you have, say, 1 million shares and 500,000 owned by two people, they own 50% of the equity of the company each, at a very, very basic level. But then with tech companies and with a lot of companies really that are growing fast, when you need investors and you've got teams, it gets really complicated, because you might have, the equity journey of a company could be, you start off with, say, two founders and they've got half each. And then you raise a bit of money from some angel investors, so they get some shares. And then you might raise some more money from like venture capital, or for some more angel investors, or family offices, and they get some more shares. And so then you end up with a whole bunch of different people owning shares, and you've got to kind of know who owns what, how much they own, what the equity's worth as well. And then you can complicate it even further by having employee equity. So that's where you carve out a piece of the ownership of the company, normally between 10 and 20%, and you say, hey, the team are going to own this piece of the company.
Yeah.
And there's some rules around that as well.
Gotcha. Cool. One of the reasons why it's so interesting to me is in some of the conversations that we have with tech companies, whether early stage or more established, is years ago, I think 6-7 years ago, I used to recruit for Zendesk, who were listed at the time, and they had a scheme of RSUs, so restricted stock units. And so when we'd get into conversations with potential candidates that were going through a hiring process, at some stage, generally at the beginning, at some stage though, the question of remuneration and benefits and all that sort of thing comes up, and we talk salary, base, and then an RSU component. So backtracking through the layers of approval from a budgetary perspective for a role to get hired, i.e., finance have approved the spend for this role, an allocation of RSUs would get attributed to that role as well. And then based on the stock price, you could very quickly work out kind of what that meant. But I remember the conversations that we'd have with candidates around salaries, and Zendesk was paying really well at the time. But the most attractive thing to the people we were talking to, for the most part, were the RSUs, was the stock. And I was surprised after finishing up with Zendesk and starting Crew. I was surprised at how few businesses actually do this. And again, I think this ties into this thing of it almost feeling almost too hard for businesses to do themselves. So I think we've sort of got the basic premise of equity being sort of this split of ownership of the business. What does that actually then? What does that mean to founders and employees? Founders, the value, if you like, of their portion of the ownership gets diluted somewhat as you carve a piece out. But what are the sort of impacts there on founders?
Yeah, so the founders first then. So, they'll start off with the whole company normally, and then a piece will go to the investors. You don't have to have investors, but most tech companies will have investors. A lot of SMEs and mid-market companies won't have investors, and that's totally fine as well. So, a lot of the companies will have a piece carved out for investors, and then they'll have a piece carved out for employee equity.
Yeah,
So, yeah, so I guess it means that the founders own a bit less of the company, but what they're supposed to be getting in value back from having employee equity is that they can attract better people,
yeah,
engage them better, motivate them better, align them more to the company's goals,
yeah,
and retain them better. And there are, in my opinion, very clear, I guess, features of employee equity schemes that help you attract, engage and retain better teams.
yeah. Yeah, and I've had countless conversations over the years with people that you're sort of approaching cold because you want to talk to them because you think they might be a fit for a role, and they'll say, "I've got shares in the business. I'm happy where I am, and I'm not leaving because I'm enjoying seeing the value go up." So those people sort of get
Definitely.
harder to move out of roles, which
Mhm.
from an employer perspective must be one of the big benefits if you're trying to deliver to a roadmap of, if you're a product led business, you're trying to deliver to a roadmap. That starts getting really hard to do when you've got to constantly turn over staff.
Oh,
So if you're
yeah.
able to retain and have your team really engaged, they're tied to the mission of the business through their equity, then that's only a good thing, right?
Oh, it's a huge, huge benefit. As a founder of a high growth company doing 2 or 3x every year and needing to do 2 or 3x every year, because that's kind of the commitment we make when we go on the venture track.
Yeah.
You don't have to be on the venture track, even if you're going 50% per year. I presume it's not that different,
Yeah.
or 50 to 100. You've just got so many challenges, so many problems. There's competition out there. The
Yeah.
market changes all the time.
Mm.
There's an infinite number of problems every business solves, and having to constantly be looking internally at your own team
Mm.
and replacing people and retraining them, and then helping maintain the culture,
Yeah.
and maintain the awareness of strategy throughout the business.
Hmm.
With all that employee churn, it's just going to be it's going to be twice as hard. So, at Cake, we have almost zero team churn, and 94%, we beat the Culture Amp survey, the top end of those bands. And it's not all about our employee equity, it's
Yeah.
all about our commitment to our
Yeah.
team. But a big component of that is them
Mm.
having some skin in the game.
Yeah.
We recently asked a lot of them, what it meant to them to have some skin in the game, and it was incredible to hear their personal stories about how, when they're having a hard day, or they've got a really tough challenge, and they know that by achieving that outcome that month, they're helping their teammates
Yeah.
achieve value from their equity. So it is a real thing. People think about it. You do need to work on it. Like, you can't just set and forget. I think you talked about how difficult these things are. I see employee equity in two major parts. There's the legal and sort of financial part, which
Yeah.
most people do a bit better with that than the other part, which is the strategy and culture part.
Yeah.
Both parts are quite tricky. The cake system has automated a lot of the compliance element and some of the culture element as
Yeah.
well. But we need to give businesses better tools, better
Mm.
systems, and just simplify to make it easier for them so that they can get them up and running well and have their team really care about it so that they
Mm.
can, they can get benefit from it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that earlier stage businesses probably would lump sort of smaller by headcount businesses into this as well is I think startups generally are better at internal communication. The larger business gets, there's more risk attached to things, and there seems to be this real need to almost like toe the corporate line. So communication around these sorts of things, the very human sides of employment, seem to get really quite challenging for them, quite difficult.
Right.
I guess what you're saying is, if you're able to communicate these things and have this equity, this sort of part ownership baked into the way that you talk about values, talk about culture, talk about
Yeah.
teamwork, then it sort of becomes this all in one sort of seamless thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say that because with, startup employee equity, which is the main area that I work
Mm.
in, you do see more like stronger employee ownership culture in that first period,
Mm.
and then you have seen it break down more so in that later stage,
Yeah.
and it could be just conflict between all the different stakeholders, just to try and sort of put it that way. You've got founders and you've got multiple different investors and investors at different stages with
Yeah.
different terms in the preference stack,
Mm.
and then you've got your employee equity. So we always advocate that as founders, you are the stewards of the culture, and you are the stewards of the success of your team, and you have to advocate strongly for yourselves because you're being diluted all the way as well, and you're getting into conflict with your investors over time, possibly. But you have to have your team right there with you all the time, and every time you're fighting for your own equity and your own equity value and your own rights, you've got to be thinking, how am I going to be doing this for my team as well? And if they see you doing that and you can communicate to them that you're doing that, there's much less chance of having a bad outcome, and there's much more chance of them really valuing it and wanting to be part of a team because they know if they leave, the founder in the other company is probably not doing that for them, and if you've done really well, like this can be a huge amount of money, like the biggest amount of capital your teams have ever seen can be sitting there in their employee equity. And so if you're protecting that and really fighting for that and showing them that you're doing that, that should be awesome for your culture and
Mm.
retention and
Mm.
engagement.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, look, I've seen people cash out SUs after 8 years working fast, high growth tech, and pretty much being able to buy a house in Melbourne off the back of it. Like that's life changing. Like
Yeah, I love
minimal
that.
minimal mortgage, house for life now,
Love that.
which most of us kind of want. That's what most of us are chasing.
That's what it's
Uh,
all about.
mm,
The equity side of things, the wealth creation side of things while
yeah,
we work in tech.
yeah,
I mean, salary's good, but people want to work with great people on something meaningful,
mm,
and they
mm,
want to build. They want to build some wealth. They want to
yeah,
create some freedom. These things
yeah,
are massive drivers for high quality people, and for building it. I often talk about the intrinsic. There's two types of value in employee equity. The first type is like the cash value, which is obviously very important, but then there's the day-to-day value of being part of something, having ownership in something, and being, having all the leaders and all the people work together as a team to succeed together.
yeah,
And they're both very real
mm,
value drivers.
yeah,
And the financial thing kind of happens at the end,
mm,
or like a couple of times along the way, but not so often. And you need to work to make sure you're creating that day to day value within
yeah.
your company.
Yeah, it's the whole area of sort of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation really interests me. The a couple of episodes ago, I did a really interesting conversation with McCure Smith, talking about hiring, inspiring people rather than just hiring bodies to do a job.
Totally.
But I think this thing of hiring people who are intrinsically motivated, but there's this future extrinsic sort of thing as well, where there's a cash out
Mm.
is kind of compelling, right?
Yep.
Um, do you? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. Do you have much in the way of data? I'm wondering if you're surveying your customers, your users around how equity is impacting workforces and that sort of thing. Do you run surveys of that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we're currently running a survey. It's our first survey, so that's exciting. We've been improving our data over the last few years.
Yeah,
The main areas of that we've been investing in on the data side is trying to help companies work out how much equity to give to their teams. And so we've had some success in that area. So just say you're hiring like a product role in a Series A company, or you're hiring a sales role in a seed company or whatever.
mm,
We've got some good data on that. That's built
yeah,
into the system. We're currently doing a bigger survey around equity in Australia, and that's likely to sort of get launched January, February.
nice.
The best reports that I've found so far, because there is quite a bit of employee ownership information
Yeah,
out there, the majority of it is from more traditional businesses, so SMEs and mid market companies.
yeah,
I mean, I don't have the exact information, but I think when it comes to productivity gains, it was somewhere around the 7 to 9, 10% increase in productivity gains
yeah.
from with the companies. This is a pretty big study that was done in the UK. So
Mhm.
employee ownership companies versus
Okay.
non-employee ownership. So, that's quite a significant increase in productivity, from having, and if you think about it, you've probably got 10% of your company out there, and then you're getting, 7 to 9% uplift in productivity. So that seems like a reasonable return. I,
Mm,
I'm not sure if we're able to quantify, the attracting talent piece, or the retention piece. So
yeah.
you've got those additional benefits,
Mm,
but
mm.
purely from a productivity standpoint, that's still a good win.
Yeah, yeah. I think tying it back into culture and this sort of intrinsic motivation. I think all of these things sort of can come together. And if you're getting 10% more productivity out of people, that's brilliant. But I think it's also then impacting the the work that people do just because that thing needs doing. I forget the actual term for it. McCure had a great term for it. The stuff that's out, like potentially outside of a job spec, like that might not be my job, but I can see it needs doing. I just get on and do it.
100%. All those little
Um,
one percenters, like when you've got your footy team and you've got that player that's all those teams that are just doing all those little one percenters, and you can just see that extra little bit of effort, and those
mm,
teams are so hard to beat, aren't they?
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. One, if you can clarify a couple of terms, because I think we hear some of these thrown around a little bit: vesting period and cliff. People say, "Oh, I've been interviewing for a role and they're offering stock and it's got a 3-year vesting period or a X amount cliff." Can you clarify what those are?
Absolutely. So the when you hire someone,
Yep.
you will grant them some options. It could be options, could be RSUs. It could
Yep.
actually be shares. Normally, it'd be options or RSUs. So you grant someone restricted stock units or options,
Yep.
and then so they get granted the whole amount on day one, but they have to earn them. Does
Mhm.
that make sense? So why they have to earn them? Well, because quite often you've just hired them and you don't want to give them a big chunk of equity on day one.
Yep.
So that's called vesting.
Yep.
And so that would normally be a 3 or 4 year period. So that protects the company because you want them to show that they're committed to the company and that they can do
Mhm.
well before they have some ownership. And it also gives the team member real clarity on what they're getting and how they earn it, how it vests. So it's
Yep.
pretty nicely balanced on both sides.
Yep.
So the first point where a team member will earn some options or units would be the cliff.
Mhm.
So that means um, you have a whole year. Normally, it's a 12-month cliff. Normally,
Yep.
where you're sort of still earning them, but the trigger point is at the end of the year, and
Right.
that's designed to sort of protect the company a bit more
Mhm.
during that period because you just met them. They haven't really been around too long, and you want them to show that they're going to be with you for at least a year before they get some equity. So just so they're on a 4-year vesting period, they
Yep.
get 1 quarter after the first year,
Right.
and then they'll normally go on to monthly or quarterly vesting after that. So They go through a whole year. They hit the cliff. They get a whole year's worth,
Right.
and then they earn it or vest it monthly after that for
Yeah.
the remaining 2 or 3 years.
Gotcha. And so if they get to a year, the 1 year cliff, does that mean that they're allowed to cash something in, or they can't cash anything in until the vesting period?
Yeah, so every scheme is a bit different, but the majority of schemes and will run such that once you have vested
Yeah.
your options, well, that's if it's options. Let's talk about options first. Once you've vested your options, the next step after that is to exercise them. So that's to convert the options to shares.
Right.
And each company is a bit different. There are normally rules around when and how you can convert from options to shares.
Mm-hmm.
So in some cases, you can do it straight away.
Yeah.
And in some cases, you have to do it with the approval of the company
Mm-hmm.
or during a particular window,
Yeah.
time window that's opened up by the company. So you just have to read the rules of the scheme to see how and when you can convert from options to shares. With RSUs, once you've vested them, you have them.
Right.
There's no need to exercise them. They're a bit different in that way. And also important to look at the tax situation for you as well. One of the bigger complications, you were probably going to ask me this anyway, and look, there's no tax advice or legal advice today,
Yeah.
but you do need to look at the scheme and look at the tax implications of vesting and exercising, and just check when the tax events occur. And you want to try and line up those things as best you can, so that the tax situation is as beneficial as possible.
Yeah. One other question. Thank you for that. One other question that I had as well was, do your employees have to be Australian citizens in Australia to get either RSUs or options or shares?
Again, it depends on the scheme, but you absolutely can issue options and RSUs internationally.
Right.
Cake has a great way of doing that built into
Yeah.
the system that we've designed over the last couple of years. But you can go to traditional law firms and they can set that up for you as well.
Mhm.
It does cost a lot more, but you absolutely can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in simple terms, if you want to issue equity internationally, as a responsible, leader of the company, you need to talk to, you need to understand the legal and financial and tax issues for the company
Yeah.
in Australia, and then you need to understand the legal and financial and tax implications for the team member in the country that they're in. And so there is complications on both sides, and you do need to work through those to do it well and to not create problems for both the company and the team member. But it can be done, and it's getting easier and easier all the time. So one thing you mentioned at the start was we need to make it easier for people. It's pretty hard, but companies like Cake are constantly productizing and systemizing and standardizing these things to help us all do it better, because it is pretty bloody hard, but we're making a lot of progress. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we see a lot. We get people applying for roles and say, can I be remote? Why can't they just hire someone remotely? And we see a lot of noise on platforms like LinkedIn where people sort of hire a role when roles can't be fully remote. And whilst embracing a global workforce sounds really attractive and all that sort of thing, it doesn't come without complications. It's not as simple as just saying, yes, you can work for me. Employment law is different in different countries. Tax rules are different in different countries. And then from what we're talking about, there's different implications there as well. So whilst they're great throwaway lines, fully remote and all that sort of thing, there are things to work through. I think sometimes people overlook the complexity of some of these things.
Yeah, for sure. And there are more and more solutions coming into this space. So Aussie providers, including Athena and Employment Hero, and others. If you've got partners, feel free to share them. And then big global players like Deal and Remote and Oyster. And so a combination of these products and products like Cake do help you build your global workforces with reduced risk and improved compliance, and reduced costs. So it's improving all the time, and it's something we're excited about continuing to improve, because having a global workforce, it helps with accessing customers, it helps with cultural advantages, it helps with in a whole range of things. So it's cool if we can help
Yeah,
facilitate it, as best we can.
absolutely. So, who, why wouldn't you do it? What sort of scenario would you be in if that going down this path of equity just wouldn't be for you?
Yeah. So, if you want, like, yeah, I mean, you have to kind of believe in employee equity. You have to
Yeah.
want to build a culture
Mm.
and have it as part of your strategy. So if you can't see yourself, in the monthly team meeting saying, hey, like our employee equity is going good and, we're all on this mission together. Like if that just doesn't resonate with you, then it's probably not worth it because you're going to chuck 10% of your company out
Yeah.
and then not get any benefit from it,
Yeah.
So if you don't want to build it into your leadership and your hiring strategy and your retention strategy, then, don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like some countries you can't really do it. Like just say your workforce is in like a country with like really like crappy kind of laws around employee equity. You might do like a
Mhm.
phantom scheme instead.
Right.
Phantom scheme is like, you create contracts that give a lot of the benefit to the team without them actually owning equity.
Right.
So you can create phantom schemes that give you a lot of the attract, engage, retention benefits, but
Mhm.
aren't equity.
Right.
Yeah, like startups, so companies that are under 10 years old have a much better regime in Australia,
Yeah.
particularly if you're under 7 years old. So the best regime for employee equity in Australia is companies that are under 7 years old.
Right.
It does extend out to 10 years. So if you're greater than 10 years old, the overall scheme is a lot more complicated. So again, you might look to a more phantom style
Mhm.
scheme, or you might look to implement it only for very senior staff,
Yeah.
executives, or people that have been there longer because it is much more costly. The
Mhm.
tax benefits aren't as good. You might end up in like a loan type scheme and stuff like that, and it does
Okay.
get a lot trickier.
Yeah. I was going to ask why it was so difficult. Is it predominantly sort of tax led?
It's almost all tax led
Right.
and a little bit of reporting
Okay.
compliance. So when the startup scheme came in, it was a combination of ASIC and the ATO working together.
Right.
So if you're issuing equity and it's over a certain amount and there's enough people involved, you have a really high reporting compliance bar to jump over. It's almost like doing a full IM, which is very costly from a legal perspective and comes with quite a bit of reporting risk.
Mhm.
And then there's some big tax risks as well, because just say you give someone $100,000 worth of equity and they have to pay $30,000-$40,000 tax in the year that you give it to them, but they can't sell it for like 5-10 years. I mean, it's obviously a
Mhm.
bit of a disaster. So with startups, they don't have to pay tax until they sell it. But with more traditional businesses that are over 10 years old, they don't get that tax break. So then you end up with some big issues around tax
Yeah.
payments and stuff. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's super helpful. Quick one. What's the difference between options and RSUs? High level.
So restricted stock unit is essentially a share with restricted abilities.
Hmm.
So you get shares straight away, which, and then an option is not, it's part of equity of the company, but it's not shares.
Right.
So an option gives you the right to buy shares in the future.
Gotcha.
So if you had an option, you wouldn't get a dividend and you
Hmm.
don't have any voting rights,
Right.
but you still have a percentage ownership of the company. So yeah, so startups almost always use options,
Yeah.
and bigger businesses, particularly listed companies, would almost always use RSUs,
Yeah.
because with RSU you're already listed on a stock market, and so you're more likely to be paying a dividend first of all,
Mhm.
and you're already on a stock market, so the shares are liquid,
Yeah.
depending on the rules around the RSU. So there can be some restrictions about what you can and can't do with it,
Yeah.
time based, etc. But yeah, essentially an RSU is either a share. Is it a share or is it a unit attached to a share? I think technically it's a unit, which is like mirrored to a share. Getting very technical and nerdy, but it essentially means you own the shares. whereas an option is a little bit different. Did I explain that okay?
Yeah, yeah, made sense to me, and I'm the business person around, so.
It's pretty tricky. I don't know. Hopefully I did okay.
But I think that sort of highlights why businesses that are thinking of going down this route need to be dealing with someone like yourselves, because there's so many layers of complexity to these things that can have an impact down the track if they don't set it up properly from the start, to save
Yeah.
them
So
any embarrassment or confusion later.
if you're a traditional business, I think you go to a traditional firm and that's fine. You make sure you go to an expert in this area. Though I think a lot of don't know how switched on people are with this kind of thing. One thing I've learned over my career is a lawyer is not a lawyer, and an accountant's not an accountant. Like you need to go to someone that does this stuff all day, every day, or they will almost guarantee to muck it up and cause you a whole heap of pain because it's very, very complex. So ask your lawyer, how many of these things have you done this year? And if they say one or none or like three, just say sorry, like whatever. We're going to go find an expert. Similarly, if you've been in traditional business for your career and you're doing a startup, whether you're starting out or your second, third, or fourth year, don't work with your existing law firm. Go work with a startup law firm. Go work with a startup accountant, or come to me directly, and I'll get it sorted for you because it's just it's a totally, totally, totally different world. You have to have the right people working for you or they're going to muck it up.
Yeah.
And the thing that Cake has done is we've streamlined and simplified, standardized so many things with the right panel of partners to help you. So it's going to be 10 times easier if you find the right people.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. I think one of the challenges that a lot of businesses potentially see is like it all sounds too hard to roll it out and make it happen. This isn't a shameless plug time, but I'm guessing with the Cake platform, it's relatively simple just to enter some data, sign an agreement, do some onboarding, and then there's some constant sort of CS behind that helps you sort of integrate this into your daily vernacular within the business, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. So look, while we were building Cake and before Cake was really good like it is now, every single ESOP we saw, or employee equity scheme we saw was broken. Every single one. And
Yeah.
I'm talking like the resolution's not signed to even implement the thing, so it doesn't even really exist.
Yeah.
The grant, the offers have not even been sent and signed by the team member.
Yeah.
The vesting's not up to date. The exercising's not there. The employee doesn't even know what they own. The company doesn't even know what anybody owns. So like it can be like the biggest mess you've ever seen. But
Seen some.
I'm sure you have. And so with Cake, it's just like we have this one-click ESOP. So you hit one button and you get the resolution and the rules and the offer letter all provided for you. Exactly. DocuSign's integrated. All the sending and signing is integrated. So everything's in the one place. Everyone knows exactly what they own. The employees can log in. The investors can log in. The founders and the lawyers and the accountants all logged into the same system all the time. So you don't have all these different versions and all this ambiguity about all that kind of thing. So it could not be easier. It's definitely the easiest way to do it in Australia. It's potentially the easiest way to do it in the world. And it saves you a ton of money, saves you in legal fees, it saves you in accounting fees. So it is really very easy now. It is still work though, and I won't sugarcoat it too much. You do need to commit to having, constant conversations about culture and strategy and communicating to your team. You need, when you're hiring, as you would know, you need to be able to say, hey, here's your 100K offer and here's your 20K a year in equity. And this is how it works. And here's your offer letter. And, so there is work, but it's awesome to build a company with employee ownership and have a team that cares. And it's cool stuff. But yeah, like it's totally doable now. You don't need to be scared about it. I think somewhere in the vicinity of 50, 60, 70, 80% even could be doing ESOPs in Australia now when it comes to startups because it's just totally doable.
So I think what we're saying is there's way more pros than cons of doing something like this. And it's interesting you talk about all these, the resolution not being done, letters not going out. I think around these sorts of initiatives, there's a whole bunch of organizational debt that mounts up. Like we all, from a tech perspective, we understand what tech debt is and all those little things that we meant to do, the little bugs we meant to fix. But we get this organizational debt as well. All these little things are meant to happen, but life keeps happening as well, and all new things always come up. So really easy for those things that get left, this debt, to come back and bite you
I love that.
when you least need it, to bite you. So by having a platform like yours that takes care and minimizes this organizational debt, that it's just got to be like peace of mind for people as well, hasn't it?
Oh, I love how you put it. Quite often, this cap table stuff, employee equity stuff, just sits there until it's like the straw that breaks the
Mm.
camel's back of the founder. You
Yeah.
know, it
Yeah.
becomes this huge stress over time as it just gets more and more unruly, and it
Mm.
really does. And then you end up in a situation where you've got tens of thousands of dollars to repair it, and you're
Mm.
delaying your
Mm.
investment round or something while
Yeah.
you're, handling it. So it is not an insignificant problem.
Mm. Mm.
But the amount of times as a founder now, when I need something, I just go into Cake, or how many shares on issue? What's the share price?
Yeah.
How many shares has this person got? Where's the contract for this person? You just go in there
Mm.
and you can, very quickly solve that problem. So yeah, it's an awesome situation to
Mm.
be in as a
Mm.
founder.
Mm. And I think with these kind of initiatives, you get this risk of single point of failure. Like someone within the business who runs this as a project, they know the most about it. If that person leaves, all the IP leaves. When you've got everything in a platform where it's all captured, you minimize this single point of failure risk. So
Love it.
yeah,
Yeah, so few companies have a good enough person on
yeah,
that as well. Like it's tricky, you've
mm,
got the founders kind of having to handle it. It's, quite often you don't have like a full financial controller
yeah,
there. If you're
mm,
enough to have one, then great.
mm,
But then,
mm,
as you say, when they leave, what happens?
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. So a lot there for founders and founding teams to be thinking about. But as we said, more pros than cons of doing it. And I think
oh yeah,
the the organizational growth that comes off it, the values alignment, teams being intrinsically motivated, but having this future goal as well that everyone's working towards, has got to outweigh any of the administrative like headaches or eye rolls that might come off the back of it. Like that's got to outweigh it, right? So I think what we're saying is there's really no reason why people can't do it. There's really no reason why, if anybody wanted to find out more, they can contact you, or someone in your team, and have a discussion.
yeah, 100%. We've got a great CS team, tons of customer love. Just ask anyone that's worked with us. I'm sure you'll hear good things. We work super hard to look after everyone as best we possibly can. There's tons of free resources on our website as well. So if you're not sure, just go onto the resources section. There's blogs and guides and toolkits. There's all these different webinars we've done in the past explaining how it all works.
Yeah,
So yeah, do check that out. We try and make sure there's as much good quality information out there as we can as well.
perfect. We'll put links to those pages when we post to our various platforms as well. This has been brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're busy, and I'm sure you've got a big list of things to get through before Christmas, before you all take off and have some festive cheer. But Jason, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'll be sure to include those links. This has been brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Great to be here.
Thanks, my friend.